tackling something that, well, it feels like it's hitting a raw nerve for a lot of people right now.
It really does. It's this paradox you shared with us, this core frustration.
Yeah, the sheer absurdity of it all. You see corporations making just astronomical amounts of money, record profits even.
And at the same time, mass layoffs, people losing jobs in sectors that feel pretty essential.
Exactly. And wealth is just concentrating faster than, well, ever before, it feels like.
It's stark. You see the houses, the stuff being bought at the very top.
And then the kicker is the same people, the same voices benefiting from all that extraction. They turn around and say,
Why aren't you working harder? Why aren't you producing more?
right, how are you going to fix this system that seems, frankly, designed to funnel wealth upwards? It's maddening.
It really is. It's what you could call the ultimate economic squeeze, isn't it? A narrative is basically, look, we've got the capital, we've bought the assets.
So why aren't you, the worker, generating enough value to prop up these increasingly obsolete institutions?
Precisely. It feels like a fundamental breakdown of the social contract. And what we're digging into today isn't just another political debate about it.
No, this is different. It's a really radical, systemic, almost revolutionary response. It's called zero work.
That's the term. And zero work, it goes way beyond just protesting or striking in the traditional sense.
It's more like philosophy, right? And it's got roots in some pretty complex stuff, systems theory, specifically the cybernetic thinking of Stafford Beer.
Absolutely. Beer's work provides the diagnostic framework. And then zero work uses this mechanism, this really fascinating mechanism called hyperstition.
Hyperstition. You'll
Yeah.
definitely need to unpack that one. The claim is basically that it can engineer a whole new reality.
That's the audacious part, yeah. The proponents claim that zero work isn't just an idea for the future, it will exist. It's framed as this hyperstitional narrative that's already real somehow, across past, present, and future.
Wow, okay. So a fiction that makes itself real through time.
Essentially, yes. We're piecing together some dense material here, drawing lines between complex systems theory, generational anger, and almost the psychology of engineered belief systems.
So the big question guiding this deep dive is, can this actually work? Can a story, a narrative, even one as potent as hyperstition claims to be, actually rewire reality on this scale?
And if it does manage to trigger some kind of systemic shock, what comes after? Is the resulting system actually viable, sustainable?
The stakes feel incredibly high. We're talking about the future of work, individual autonomy, maybe even the basic coherence of society.
No pressure then.
Right. So before we jump into the cure, this zero work idea, we absolutely have to understand the disease it's trying to treat.
And for that diagnosis, Stafford Beer's work is foundational. He wasn't just pointing fingers at politicians or bad economic policies.
No, his critique went deeper, didn't it? To the actual architecture of our systems. He was basically saying the whole structure is broken.
He gave us the language, the cybernetic language, to really describe why it's broken. And a key concept there is variety.
Variety. Okay, break that down for us. It sounds simple, but I get the feeling it's crucial here.
It is. Variety, in Beer's terms, is essentially complexity. It's the number of possible states a system can be in.
Like all the different things that can happen.
Exactly. Think about today versus, say, the early 1800s. The sheer amount of information flying around, the different kinds of financial instruments, global political hotspots, even just the number of possible career paths or lifestyles.
Variety has just exploded.
Exponentially. It's not a gentle curve upwards. But here's the problem. Our institutions, governments, schools, legal systems, corporations, they were fundamentally designed centuries ago.
Or a much simpler world.
A much slower world, yeah. They were built to handle the kinds of disturbances, the rate of change that was typical back maybe at the start of the Industrial Revolution.
And now they're facing this tidal wave of modern complexity.
And that mismatch, that's where you get what Beer called requisite variety failure. It's a core cybernetic principle.
Requisite variety.
Yeah.
Meaning the system needs enough internal complexity, enough variety to handle the complexity coming from its environment.
Precisely. Any system that wants to stay stable, to adapt, needs to be able to absorb shocks from the outside world. When a big one hits, think the 2008 crash or the pandemic or the sudden rise of generative AI.
The system needs time to process that.
It needs what Beer called relaxation time. Time to settle down, figure out what just happened, maybe run some internal adjustments, find a new stable footing.
But the shocks, the crises, they're just coming too fast now, one after another.
Faster and harder than the system can possibly settle. You've got supply chain issues hitting right when there's a major climate event, and that gets amplified by social media panic. which then triggers a market reaction.
It's relentless. There is no relaxation time.
Exactly. And when the rate of disturbance swamps the system's ability to relax and find a stable point, well, that stable reference point just vanishes.
So the system is just bouncing around.
It enters perpetual oscillation. It's constantly reacting, never stable. Beer called it running amok. And that, right there, explains so much of what we see.
Like government's just lurching from one crisis to the next.
Constant crisis management. They're only thinking about next week, maybe next quarter if they're lucky, because any attempt at long-term planning gets completely derailed by the next crisis that's already building.
Okay, so that's the visible instability.
Yeah.
Things feel chaotic because, well, they are systemically chaotic.
But Beer pointed out an even deeper consequence. When a system has no stable reference point, when it's always oscillating,
It can't learn.
it destroys the basis for learning. How can you tell if a policy worked or failed if, during the time it was implemented, 3 other unrelated massive shocks hit the system?
You can't isolate the variables. You don't know what caused what.
Exactly. You can't run effective experiments. And if a system can't learn, it can't adapt. It can't evolve.
And that's huge because if you're young and you look at these big institutions, see them visibly running amok, visibly unable to learn or adapt.
Why would you invest your faith, your energy, your future in propping them up? This isn't just teenage rebellion. It's a rational response to observing systemic failure. The cybernetics explains the disillusionment, hashtag 1.2, the trap of reductionism.
Okay, so the system itself is struggling with complexity. But it's not just the structure, is it? It's also about the people running the system.
That's the other side of the coin. The managers, the administrators, the politicians, the CEOs, they're often trapped inside the very ways of thinking, the reductionist models, that helped create the crisis.
What do you mean by reductionist here? Simplifying things too much.
Yes, drastically simplifying. It's almost a defense mechanism. The sheer variety, the complexity of the real world, it's just too much for any individual or small group to fully grasp.
Cognitive overload.
Exactly. So the natural response, what Beer identified as the variety attenuator imperative, is to try and reduce that complexity, filter it down, constrain it.
Attenuate means to lessen or reduce, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to damp down the variety.
Precisely. They focus on simple metrics, easily measurable things. They insist on sticking to the established low-variety model even when it's clearly failing.
Why? Is it just stubbornness?
It's partly self-preservation for the system's identity. There's a fear, maybe unconscious, that if they admit how complex things really are or admit their simple model is wrong, everything could just collapse into chaos. So sticking to the simple model feels safer, even if it prevents real solutions.
And these variety attenuators, these filters, they're everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Beer talked about bank upon bank of them shaping our reality. Think about corporate culture. What are key performance indicators, KPIs?
Perfect variety attenuators. Takes a complex job, maybe involving creativity, teamwork, long-term thinking.
And boils it down to 3 numbers you have to hit this quarter. Your potential is attenuated, reduced to fit the model.
Or standardized tests in schools.
Massive variety attenuator. Reduces the huge spectrum of human intelligence and potential down to a single score the system can easily process.
And social media algorithms.
Huge ones. They filter your reality, showing you things that confirm what you already think, constraining political debate into predictable, low-variety shouting matches. They actively attenuate exposure to genuinely different or complex perspectives.
So we end up feeling like we have choices, but maybe we don't really.
The sources call it an illusion of freedom. We think we're freely choosing our path, our beliefs, our purchases, but actually these layers of attenuators are subtly guiding us, reducing the immense variety of human possibility down to a narrow band of pre-approved, manageable options.
The right career, the right political party, the right things to buy.
Anything outside that gets flagged as weird or risky or just not viable within the current setup.
Okay, I have to push back a bit here, though. Is Beer's cybernetic view itself a bit reductionist? Focusing just on variety and attenuation, doesn't that miss things like, actual greed or power struggles or deliberate manipulation by certain groups, class interests?
That's a really important point, and Beer wouldn't deny those things exist. His argument, I think, is that the flawed systemic architecture is what allows those things to run rampant and become so destructive.
So the broken system enables the bad behavior.
Yes. Greed, or the desire for power can only truly warp the system if the system itself lacks the requisite variety, the feedback loops, the ability to learn and correct course. The reductionist model, focusing only on profit, ignoring social costs, becomes the tool that powerful interests use precisely because the system is too simple to stop them.
So fixing the architecture, making the system capable of handling more variety, would actually counteract those human failings.
That's the cybernetic hope, yes. A truly viable system with proper feedback and learning would inherently filter out actions based purely on narrow self-interest, because those actions would destabilize the whole, the pathology. Hashtag 1.3 money and reductionism as variety squeezers. And building right on that, one of the most powerful, most felt variety squeezers today is the economic system itself, money.
Which is ironic because money is supposed to increase choice, increase your personal variety.
It's supposed to. But for vast numbers of people, it's become the primary constraint, the main tool limiting their options.
And this brings us right back to that core frustration we started with. The listener saying they make all the money and tell us to work more. Is this economic squeeze?
The sources call it an intolerable cost on existence, especially for younger generations and the working class. Just affording the basics, a place to live, education, healthcare, it costs so much.
That it forces you into jobs you might hate, jobs that are stressful, often low variety in terms of autonomy.
And often, you're working to prop up the very systems, the obsolete structures that are creating the squeeze in the first place. You're doing things, your most human activity, your time and energy, gets consumed by just surviving.
Leaving very little room, very little variety for anything else, personal growth, community building, creativity.
And the system we have now, this particular flavor of capitalism, focused on endless growth, conspicuous consumption, the sources are blunt, calling it the most alienating force the world has ever known.
Because it takes the infinite potential of a human being
All that high variety.
and tries to squash it into one narrow definition of success, economic productivity within the current model.
Right. If you want to be an artist or dedicate your life to community work or do deep scientific research that doesn't promise immediate profit, well, good luck. The system actively marginalizes or starves those paths of resources because they don't fit the convenient low-variety economic metrics.
You see it starkly in the gig economy, don't you? It's sold as be your own boss, freedom, flexibility.
But the platforms themselves are massive variety attenuators. They take complex work, driving, caring, creating, strip it down to a simple, quantifiable unit.
A ride, a task, a delivery.
And then enforce rigid, low-variety behavior through ratings, algorithms, constant monitoring. The workers' actual autonomy, their variety, is squeezed incredibly tight by the need to please the platform's narrow, profit-driven rules.
It's the illusion of freedom again.
Let's bring in that classic Stafford Beer example because it nails this institutional reductionism perfectly. He was consulting for a steel company, I believe.
Right, the umbrella department story.
Exactly. An accountant comes to him and says, "We have to shut down this department making umbrellas. It's losing money." Simple, clean.
The convenient metric, departmental profit and loss. Low variety.
But Beer, with his cybernetic whole system view, asks more questions. Turns out that umbrella department employed basically all the women in the local village.
So shutting it down.
Creates a massive social catastrophe. Widespread unemployment, poverty, family breakdown, the collapse of the local community fabric. A huge, high-variety disaster.
But the system, focused only on the simple, easy-to-measure loss in one spreadsheet column, was completely blind to that larger systemic reality.
That's reductionism in action, and scale that up. Our global economy, obsessed with GDP growth, stock market indices, quarterly earnings for big companies.
The very metrics that reward the extractors our listener was talking about.
We're doing the same thing. We're measuring the convenient stuff, the easily quantifiable profits, while systematically ignoring the high-variety systemic costs, collapsing ecosystems, rising inequality, the mental health crisis, community decay.
We're measuring profit, not blindness. That's the core illness Zero Work is trying to cure.
Okay, so we have this picture of a system running amok, trapped in simplistic thinking, economically squeezing people. What does that actually do to us? To individuals trying to live in this mess?
This is where the analysis shifts from abstract systems to, well, the lived reality. The fragmentation, the confusion, the despair people feel.
And the sources pinpoint a really interesting moment for this shift. Around 2012.
2012. Why then?
Well, multiple lines of research suggest that right around that year, things like social media adoption, smartphone penetration, the sheer speed and volume of data, they hit a kind of saturation point. peak technical connectivity was achieved.
You'd think that would lead to more connection, more understanding.
You would think. But paradoxically, what happened after 2012 was the exact opposite. Almost every measure of social cohesion, trust in institutions, trust in each other, agreement on basic facts, even national mental health metrics started going downhill fast.
So the technology that promised to bring us together actually drove us apart. Pulverized shared reality.
That's the argument. We entered what some call an epistemic crisis, a crisis of knowledge, of truth. The sources say words themselves are losing their effect, emptying of meaning, and failing anymore to shape society.
Why? How did that happen?
Because the platforms and media structures, acting as those variety attenuators we talked about, got incredibly good at reinforcing our existing beliefs, feeding us more of what we already think.
Creating filter bubbles, echo chambers.
Exactly, which results in a collective perception of reality that's described as very much cut off at the knees. We end up in these silos where there's less and less overlap, less common ground, less shared truth that everyone can agree on. It's all tribal confirmation bias.
And now that fragmentation is getting supercharged, isn't it? With AI generating deep fakes, AI slop flooding the internet.
Oh, absolutely. It intensifies the crisis dramatically. You mentioned the Hurricane Melissa example earlier.
Right, the fake shark videos.
Yeah, it's such a perfect, if slightly absurd, illustration. AI-generated or cleverly edited videos pop up, supposedly showing sharks swimming down flooded streets in Jamaica during a hurricane. They go viral, hundreds of thousands of views.
Because it's sensational, it grabs attention.
But if you look closely, maybe you see a weird blurriness, an artifact of the generation process. Or, even more tellingly, you check the timestamp and realize the video was posted 4 hours before the hurricane actually hit land.
But who does that? Who stops to check?
Very few people. Because our brains, already swimming in this information overload, just default to the path of least resistance. It's cognitively taxing, it takes effort to stop, be skeptical, and do a little digging on your own.
It's easier to just believe it, share it, react to it.
Exactly. Our brains struggle to maintain the necessary requisite variety to critically evaluate everything coming at us. So we fall for the low-variety, high-impact narrative, whether it's hurricane sharks or that bizarre Reggie Von Brock hidden treasure hoax you mentioned.
Now the non-existent treasure hunt people got excited about.
People wanted to believe it so badly, the sudden windfall, the excitement that they shared it like wildfire, until the police had to step in and say, folks, this isn't real.
That ease with which fiction can spread and be accepted, that feels critical for understanding how something like hyperstition might even be conceivable.
It sets the stage. If reality is already this malleable, this easily influenced by compelling narratives, well, why not try to consciously engineer a narrative for a better outcome?
Okay, so we have information overload, fragmented reality. What does this do to the individual psyche, especially, say, a young person growing up in this environment?
Well, imagine being filled with potential, with unique ideas and feelings, high individual variety, in Beer's terms. But you find yourself in a society that feels low variety, constrained, confusing, and maybe doesn't even seem to see you.
The result is despair.
Deep despair, yeah. The sources talk about young people feeling lost, like a total cipher, a feeling that no one knows who they are.
That really hits home. It's that sense of being just a data point, right? Your potential reduced to fit some algorithm or demographic category. Your path feels predetermined. Your uniqueness filtered out.
The system basically communicates, implicitly or explicitly, your specific variety is not required or valued here. And when that happens, when that innate human complexity has no constructive outlet, it can curdle into something else.
Pathological outputs.
That's the term used. Things like nihilistic acts, shocking violence, catastrophic destruction. The sources argue these aren't born from apathy, from not caring.
No, they're often framed that way.
But this perspective sees them as the opposite of apathy. They're energetic. They are the pathological output of a malfunctioning system. They represent a desperate, high-variety scream trying to break through all those filters, all those attenuators.
It becomes the only signal strong enough to get noticed.
When the system is designed to ignore or dismiss quieter forms of dissent, a protest, a vote, a carefully shocking, destructive act feels like the only way to force the system to stop and pay attention. To register your existence, your pain, the variety it tried to suppress.
It's a horrific way to demand requisite variety.
Truly tragic. But the despair also finds other outlets, sometimes more symbolic, constructive forms of dissent. You mentioned the example of Gen Z protesters adopting that fictional pirate flag.
Yeah, the Jolly Roger from the anime One Piece. That detail is fascinating.
It really is. They aren't rallying under old political banners, Marx or whoever. They're choosing a symbol from fiction.
Ben, what does that symbol represent for them?
According to the analysis, it's about seeking freedom, friendship, and fortune, core human desires for autonomy, connection, and well-being. And significantly in the story, they're fighting against an authoritarian world government.
So it's a very clear, almost primal demand for a different kind of system, one that allows for individual flourishing outside the current oppressive structures, a high-variety system.
Exactly. It's a symbolic rejection of the low-variety world they feel trapped in.
Okay, so that symbolic revolt, combined with the deep systemic failures diagnosed by cybernetics, brings us right to the doorstep of the proposed cure: zero work.
This is where the critique turns into action, or at least a blueprint for action.
And at its heart, zero work is a rejection of that economic squeeze we talked about, right?
A total rejection. It starts from the premise that our entire society has effectively become a social factory.
A social factory, meaning
Meaning that almost everything we do, especially online, every click, every search, every post, every interaction generates data. And that data is immensely valuable.
and it's harvested, extracted by huge platforms, usually without us being paid for it.
Exactly. We are, in effect, performing constant unpaid labor that fuels these massive tech monopolies and advertising engines. Our lives, our attention, our interactions have been turned into a resource to be mined.
So if the system works by extracting value from everything we do all the time,
Then the most fundamental act of resistance, the ultimate political strike, isn't just refusing your specific paid job for a while.
it's refusing all of it, the entire framework of being turned into a value-generating node.
That's the core idea behind the refusal of work in zero work. It's a strike against the social factory itself.
Wow, okay, that's big. How would that even work?
And this is where it gets really interesting and maybe controversial. The method isn't traditional political organizing, marches, lobbying, voting, because the argument is those channels are already compromised, too easily filtered by the existing system's attenuators.
So they need a different tool.
They need hyperstition. This is the engine driving zero work.
Right, hyperstition. Let's spend some real time on this. You defined it earlier as a fiction that makes itself real. That sounds like science fiction, or maybe magic.
It does have that flavor, doesn't it? But think of it less as magic and more as narrative engineering or mimetic warfare, maybe.
Okay, how does a fiction make itself real?
The theory is that certain types of narratives, certain ideas or belief systems, if they become widespread and potent enough, and crucially, if people start acting as if they are true.
Their actions start to change the world.
Yes. Reality begins to reorganize itself to conform to the fiction. It's not just predicting the future. It's actively creating the future by embedding the belief in it so deeply that it alters present behavior.
So the belief that zero work will succeed, or maybe already has succeeded in some future timeline.
That belief becomes the justification, the driving force for taking the radical actions now that are necessary to bring it about.
It creates a kind of time loop. The imagined future reaches back and alters the present, which then solidifies that future.
That's a good way to put it. The hyperstition claims zero work is inevitable, or perhaps already exists as a potential reality. This conviction demands immediate, drastic changes in the now.
And those changes then rewrite the past narrative, the narrative that said the current system was the only possibility.
Precisely. It's an attempt to bypass our compromised rational thinking. If logical arguments and gradual reforms are just getting filtered out by the system's defenses...
The hyperstition tries to jump over those defenses.
Exactly. It aims to operate on a deeper level, manipulating the informational substrate of reality itself.
Whoa, informational substrate of reality.
Yeah, it's heady stuff. The idea is to use powerful symbols, aesthetics, maybe even sounds, things sometimes called sigils in these contexts, potent meme-like units of meaning.
To inject the zero-work narrative directly into the collective unconscious, bypassing the rational mind.
That seems to be the goal. To reprogram fundamental beliefs about work, value, and possibility without getting bogged down in debates the old system is designed to win.
Okay, so the hyperstition provides the belief framework, the engine. How does that translate into concrete action?
Yes. If the goal is to bypass the filters and force the old system to confront a reality it can't handle, the action needs to be sudden, radical, and undeniable. The sources describe immediate, global economic shock therapy as a core tactic.
Shock therapy sounds aggressive. What did it involve?
It was designed to be instantly disruptive and ideally irreversible. Two key examples given are, first, a systematic, large-scale redistribution of money.
Taking it
From huge, concentrated balances, the very pools of wealth causing the listener's frustration, and directly transferring it into accounts, showing clear signs of financial distress. A direct reversal of the extraction flow.
And the second example.
The complete wiping out of student debt. A massive, symbolic cancellation of debt burdens that constrains so many people.
Okay, hold on. This raises immediate red flags for me. Who decides which balances are huge and which accounts show distress? Who administers this? Isn't this just replacing one form of control of the market with another, potentially more arbitrary one?
That is absolutely the critical question, the viability question we have to tackle next. It's a huge risk.
It sounds like a new form of central planning, potentially just as authoritarian as the system it's trying to replace.
The justification offered within the zero-work narrative is basically, the current system is so broken, so pathologically resistant to change through normal means, that gradualism is impossible. It will just attenuate any mild reform.
So only a massive shock can break the logjam.
That's the argument. The only way to force adaptation is to amplify variety so drastically, so suddenly, that the old system's rules simply cannot cope. It must either collapse or undergo fundamental, revolutionary change.
They're weaponizing Beer's requisite variety principle. Instead of using it for stability, they're using it to deliberately overwhelm the system.
Exactly. Create a reality, a world where vast sums of money move instantly, where debt disappears overnight that is simply too complex, too high variety for the old managerial class and their reductionist models to filter or control.
Force them to confront a reality they can't attenuate back down to their comfort zone.
And the hyperstition is what justifies this shock. The unwavering belief that a zero-work reality must and will exist provides the mandate for these destabilizing actions now. It's framed as a cybernetic demand for autonomy, freeing humanity from the constraints of the social factory.
But okay, amplifying variety to the point of collapse.
Yeah.
Sounds like you might just get collapse, chaos. What's the plan for after the shock? How does it stabilize into something better, not just a free-for-all?
The theory seems to rely heavily on the success of the hyperstition itself. The idea is that the shock is so effective and the narrative so pertinent that it instantaneously creates a new collective consensus, a new shared identity around non-extraction and autonomy.
A new baseline reality snaps into place almost immediately.
That seems to be the hope, that the belief becomes self-sustaining very quickly. However, as we'll see when we apply Beer's viable system model, relying on instantaneous belief-based stabilization is, well, you really start to bite.
Which brings us squarely to the toughest part of this deep dive. We've got this radical plan, zero work, driven by hyperstition, aiming for economic shock therapy. But is it viable? Can it actually work and create a stable, functioning society?
This is where we need to bring Stafford Beer back in, specifically his viable system model, or VSM. It's the gold standard in cybernetics for assessing whether any system can survive and maintain its identity independently.
Okay, the VSM. You said it's a framework for designing or diagnosing any viable system, an organism, a company, maybe even a revolution.
Exactly. Beer defined a viable system as one capable of an independent existence. Think of a fetus becoming viable outside the womb. To achieve that, Beer argued, a system absolutely needs 5 specific subsystems working together. They are necessary and sufficient.
Right. Can you quickly remind us what those 5 systems are?
Sure. It maps roughly like this. System 1 is the actual work being done, the basic operations. In a zero-work context, maybe this is, well, people living their autonomous lives.
The doing things level.
Yes. System 2 is coordination. It stops the different system 1s from crashing into each other or working at cross purposes, like a scheduling function.
Okay.
System 3 is internal regulation and control. It looks downwards, making sure the system 1s are actually operating efficiently and according to the overall rules. It includes things like auditing.
The internal management layer.
Then System 4 is crucial. It's the intelligence function. It looks outwards, scanning the environment beyond the system itself, looking for future threats, opportunities, changes. It builds models of the future.
The lookout post, strategic planning.
And finally, System 5 is the ultimate boss. It sets the overall policy, defines the system's purpose, its identity. It balances the internal demands from System 3 with the external realities from System 4 to make the big decisions.
Okay, 5 systems needed for viability. Now, zero work is all about maximizing autonomy. How does that fit with this seemingly rigid 5-part structure?
That's a key tension. In the VSM, autonomy isn't just do whatever you want. Beer defined it quite precisely. Autonomy is a computable function of the system's defined purpose, System
Right.
5, meaning if a system or society has no defined purpose, then yes, autonomy is almost infinite, but that's chaos, not viability.
Yeah.
To have a coherent, viable system that grants autonomy, System 5 must establish some core rule, some fundamental identity.
Can you give that example again? The loving society one.
Absolutely. If System 5 declares our core identity is this is a loving society, then that single rule sets the boundary. Autonomy is huge. You can do almost anything except things that violate the core rule, like acts of hatred or deliberate harm. That rule attenuates the infinite variety of actions down to the spectrum compatible with the system's identity.
So for zero work to be viable and grant autonomy, its System 5 needs to define a clear purpose, maybe maximal autonomy without extraction.
Something like that.
Cool.
But defining and enforcing that purpose without recreating new constraints is the challenge. Tag 4.1 self-reference and the minister's meter.
And the moment zero work starts defining its own identity, its own rules, it runs headfirst into this incredibly tricky problem Beer highlighted, self-reference.
Yes. This is where things get mind-bendingly complex. Beer's example of the Minister of Economics with the algedonic meter is just perfect for illustrating this.
Remind us how that worked. The minister's giving a speech.
About, say, implementing some key zero-work policy like universal basic income. And right there on stage next to him is this algedonic meter, a gauge showing the real-time, summed-up emotional reaction of the entire population to what he's saying. Red means anger, fear. Green means happiness, acceptance.
Okay. Simple feedback seems straightforward. He says something unpopular. The meter goes red. He notices and adjusts his policy.
But here's the twist of self-reference. The population knows the minister is watching the meter. They know their reaction is directly influencing policy in real time.
Oh, so they can start gaming the meter.
Exactly. And the minister knows, they know he's watching. He knows they might be trying to manipulate the signal.
So he has to interpret the meter not just as raw emotion, but as potentially strategic signaling.
Precisely. It creates what Beer called an infinitely recessive piece of logic. I know that you know that, I know that you know, and so on. The populace can fake happiness to encourage a policy they like, or fake anger to block one they don't. The minister has to guess if the signal is real or tactical.
That makes the whole communication process vastly more complex. The variety just shoots up.
Exponentially. And zero work, being a hyperstition, a belief system designed to act upon itself across time, kind of infinite recursion. For it to maintain coherence, it has to somehow manage this massively increased variety generated by its own self-referential nature.
This really highlights a potential viability crisis. If zero work is supposed to be decentralized, maybe even leaderless, driven by this shared hyperstition, who or what is performing those crucial VSM functions?
Exactly. Where is the System 3 audit, making sure resources redistributed by the shock therapy are used effectively and aren't just captured by new elites? Where is the System 4 intelligence scanning for external threats or unforeseen consequences of zero work? Who is the definitive System 5 setting policy when the hyperstition inevitably encounters ambiguity?
Can the narrative, the hyperstition itself, really be all those things?
That seems to be the implicit claim that the shared belief, the collective consciousness aligned by the hyperstition, will self-organize to perform these functions. System 5 becomes the collective will, System 2, the emergent coordination.
But relying on pure belief to manage that level of complexity feels incredibly fragile. What happens if the belief starts to wobble? If consensus frays?
Then the system risks immediate collapse because the underlying structural mechanisms, the formal audits, the dedicated intelligence agencies, the clear policy-making bodies might not be there in a robust traditional sense. It's a high-wire act. Tag 4.2, the pathological trap of identity.
And this fragility connects to another deep problem the sources identify, even within the zero-work narrative itself.
Yeah.
They seem aware of a kind of inherent danger in their own project.
Yes, there's a fascinating moment of self-critique where they acknowledge the hubris involved, the sheer arrogance of trying to engineer a perfect system, to systematize wisdom and virtue on a global scale.
They call it a Tower of Babel rendered in quantum mechanics.
It's a powerful image. It recognizes the danger of trying to impose a single grand design, even a well-intentioned one, onto the messy complexity of human reality.
Because, as Beer argued, establishing a system's identity, System 5, requires closure. It has to define what it is, which also means defining what it is not. And that involves deciding how variety gets managed, right?
Absolutely. System closure is the act of determining how variety will be handled within the system's boundaries. If zero work defines itself as the utopia of autonomy and non-extraction, it must, by definition, enforce that identity.
It'd have to prevent actions that contradict the core principles.
Which means it has to attenuate certain kinds of variety, the variety associated with, say, coercive hierarchies or exploitative economic models.
But wait, isn't that exactly what it was fighting against? The old system attenuating variety? Doesn't zero work risk becoming the very thing it sought to destroy, a new kind of authoritarian filter?
That is the core paradox, the pathological trap, and it ties directly into another crucial observation from Beer: downward perception and upward perception.
How management sees things versus how the workers see things.
Exactly. What looks to the bosses, the administrators of the new zero-work reality, may be the guardians of the hyperstition, like a necessary calming of variety, like sensible rules needed to keep the utopia stable.
Might be perceived by the elements, the actual people living in this new reality, as a gross interference with individual liberty.
Yeah.
As new chains, just different ones.
Remember the shock therapy, wiping debt, redistributing wealth? That's presented as a massive increase in variety, a liberation.
More options, more freedom for individuals.
But if the system then has to impose new rules, new constraints, to maintain its own viability, to prevent descent into chaos, will those constraints feel like liberation? Or will they feel like the System 5 identity being imposed from the top down?
So for zero work to actually succeed and stay liberating, that feedback loop has to work perfectly. The will of the people can't just be assumed by the hyperstition.
It has to genuinely emerge from the bottom up, be constantly sensed, incorporated, and recursively shape the System 5 identity. It needs that perfect VSM recursion Beer described. If it becomes a top-down imposition of the correct way to live, even a correctly autonomous way,
Then it's just another reductionist trap doomed to fail when its own suppressed variety eventually explodes.
and the sources draw this incredible parallel between the external systemic struggle and a deeply personal internal one. It brings the whole thing right back to the individual listener's experience.
You mean the day-me-night-me concept? This internal split identity?
Exactly. We started with external economic extraction, but this suggests maybe the most fundamental extraction is internal, the way the ego tries to simplify itself, to disown its own complexity.
So just like the failing external system oscillates between crisis and reaction.
The individual psyche under pressure can fragment and oscillate too. This isn't just about having good days and bad days. The analysis frames this day-me-night-me split as a deliberate, though perhaps desperate, strategy by the ego.
It's a strategy for what?
To manage its moral contradictions, which feel unbearable in a world demanding simplicity.
So the ego is performing internal variety attenuation on itself.
That's a perfect way to put it. The day-me is the acceptable, functional, maybe high-achieving persona. It maintains a sense of coherence, moral purity, a carefully constructed, low-variety self-image that society rewards.
And the night-me.
That's where all the inconvenient variety gets shoved. The darkness, the shame, the guilt, the anger, the messy impulses, the potential for failure or even violence. It's the shadow self hidden away to keep the day-me viable in a reductionist world.
But in doing that, by suppressing that internal variety,
the individual cuts themselves off from a huge part of their own potential, their own wholeness. The attempt to maintain a simple identity leads to internal fragmentation and loss of power.
so the path to individual viability, to becoming whole, isn't further suppression.
No, quite the opposite. It mirrors the systemic solution. The psychological path forward is integration, what Carl Jung called the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites.
Bringing day-me and night-me together, ego and shadow.
Yes. It means the conscious ego has to stop attenuating its own variety. It has to turn around, face the darkness it relegated to the night-me, acknowledge it, understand it, and integrate it into a larger, more complex, but ultimately more resilient self.
And the sources say this integration is hard.
Incredibly difficult, maybe the hardest thing a person can do. Confronting your own shadow, the parts of yourself you despise or fear, takes immense courage. But it's seen as the only way to move beyond internal oscillation and achieve genuine psychological viability.
Wow. Okay, so there's this deep connection being drawn here.
A very depth connection. Both the external project of zero work, using hyperstition,
Yeah.
and the internal struggle of the fragmented self, the day-night delusion, are fundamentally about manipulating the informational substrate of reality through narrative and belief.
One tries to structure society through a chosen fiction. The other tries to structure the self through a chosen, often unconscious fiction.
Exactly. And in both cases, the path away from control, external attenuation or chaos, internal fragmentation, seems to involve the same difficult work. Embracing complexity, integrating the suppressed variety, whether it's societal dissent or the personal shadow.
The viability of the system and the viability of the self are reflections of each other. Both require moving beyond reductionism. Hashtag tag outro. What an incredible arc. We started this deep dive with that really visceral, common feeling of frustration, seeing wealth concentrate while being told you need to work harder.
Yeah, the absurdity of economic extraction in plain sight. And we use Stafford Beer's cybernetics to see that this isn't just bad policy, it's a symptom of deeper systemic failure. Obsolete structures struggling with modern complexity, trapped in reductionist thinking, leading to that state of running amok.
Perpetual oscillation, inability to learn, and that systemic breakdown creates the conditions for cognitive fragmentation, the collapse of shared reality, and deep individual despair.
Which then fuels the radical response. Zero work. Not just a protest, but an attempt to engineer a new reality using hyperstition, that fiction designed to make itself real across time.
A reality initiated by drastic economic shock therapy, aiming to overwhelm the old system by amplifying variety.
But then we had to ask the hard question. Is it viable? Applying Beer's VSM, we saw the immense challenges, the dangers of self-reference, the risk of replicating authoritarian control in the very attempt to create autonomy, the difficulty of managing complexity without falling back into reductionism.
And crucially, we saw how this external struggle for a viable system mirrors the internal struggle for a viable self, the need to integrate our own complexity, our own day-me and night-me, to avoid fragmentation.
The big takeaway seems to be that control, whether external or internal, often works by suppressing variety. And chaos results from unintegrated complexity. The path to true viability for society or a person lies in finding ways to embrace and integrate complexity, not deny it.
Which leads us to our final thought, something for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. We've seen how powerfully belief and narrative, whether it's a collective hyperstition like zero work or a personal delusion like the day-night split, can literally shape our perceived reality. We seem incredibly susceptible to these informational structures.
So perhaps the most fundamental fight for a coherent, viable, high-variety reality doesn't actually start out there fighting the economic system or the political powers that be.
Maybe it starts right here, inside each of us.
What concrete internal steps might you need to take? What personal shadow work? What integration of your own contradictions? What refusal to accept a convenient, low-variety version of yourself is necessary?
How do you prevent your own internal complexity, your own potential for fragmentation, from becoming the very trap that limits your freedom and viability? Where does the deepest work of self-governance, of achieving requisite variety within yourself, truly begin?
It's a complex question, certainly high variety, something to mull over.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.